Hey everybody, welcome. So since we do have some new people, I'll just do some quick intros. Drew is unfortunately not going to be able to make Bildr Hour today. We're definitely going to miss him. He is at his checkup with his baby, with his new baby. So um, so yeah, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Cora and I help run support and do all kinds of other little things with Bildr. And I've got Dorian here who's on the team. And Dorian is amazing. I always say this, he's like our secret weapon because he knows how to solve the most complex problems and can come up with amazing solutions. So if you're ever trying to debug through something really complicated and you can't figure it out, reach out to that guy and he can help you. And then we've got Mark, who is our founder. And Mark is kind of like the mad scientist that somehow inspires us to do crazy things we didn't even know were possible. And he's continually pushing the envelope with us. And Mark also, we had a lot of questions in the community. For those of you that are new, we know that our blind spot is like education and documentation. So we're working really hard on that. And we had a lot of questions in the community asking for examples on things like marketplaces and stuff like that. So Mark saw that instead of like responding and being like, hey, we'll work on this, or we don't have anything right now, but hopefully someone will build someone. He's like, I'm going to go build this thing. And so that's what he's been doing this last week, in addition to all the other stuff that he does with Bildr. So if that kind of shows you any kind of the mad genius that Mark is, that's that. Hey, Loriance, welcome.
I feel like, Cora, one of those words doesn't fit. It's either mad or genius. I don't know which one.
I tend to think that it's a beautiful amalgamation of both. That's what makes people as successful and as wonderful. So
I tend to bite off more than I
Cora.
can chew.
Pardon?
Good to see you.
I said I tend to bite off more than I can chew, you know?
But that's sometimes good because you learn in the process, don't you?
That's right.
Which is always great.
That is true. So Lauren is coming in. She is a part of the Flow agency. And they've got some really cool things that they're building in the works, something really, really fun. So maybe we'll ask her about that later. Let me see. BJ, welcome. Who else did we have pop in? Kevin. Hi, Kevin. And Bill Kelly. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so yeah, we did a little bit of intros. It's Friday. So as I mentioned, Mark has been working on building out this marketplace. So it's kind of like a job board. And we were just testing through it this morning. So we might be debugging some stuff in today's call, but when we get it there and we finish debugging, we're going to turn it into a pattern and then give y'all the link so that, yes, the dog, I've got two of them. My little foster dog is actually made his way over to the couch. But if he comes in, I'll show y'all him. He recently, I had to go pick him up yesterday because his potential adoption didn't fall through, but I am happy because I'm getting the snuggle. So I get the good bit of that. So yeah, Mark, whenever you are ready, take us through the marketplace. I think it would be really helpful for everyone to be able to see, let's start from the beginning. What were your thoughts on page structure? Yeah. How did you start off with the design? And then I think we can probably go through, I think the data setup would be helpful to talk about, things like that. And then if anyone has questions, ask them in the chat or here on the call and we'll go through it. And then after that, let's also do a Q&A. I know, a lot of you might have some questions on what you can do with Bildr or how to do something, and we can just go through that and troubleshoot in real time. So let's do it.
Perfect. Cool. Thank you, Cora. Yeah, I went out. At first, I was going to make a job board where there's a two-sided marketplace, and your, you have an admin panel as the person who posts a job, and an admin panel as the person who, applies for the job and all that. And then I thought it'd be interesting to do something a little different. And I went and just looked at different job boards that are out there and went for like the simplest one. And it ended up almost like Craigslist. It's just sort of, it's like old school Craigslist, like before there were user accounts. So I did the whole thing without even needing user accounts, where you're basic and you have like unique edit links and stuff like that. And the reason I did it is because it's just non-traditional, and I wanted to show how, with Bildr, wherever your head goes, you can go, wherever your mind goes, you can get there. And so, I mean, you can do it with user accounts. You can do all those pieces too, no problem. But I went this different route in the middle of it. And this is typical for my projects, and I'm sure most people's projects, right? In agency work, it's called scope creep. In side projects, it's called every project, right? That's just what it is. So yeah, so I thought we could go through quite a few things. But what I'm really interested in knowing out of our conversation today is, what would you want to see an in-depth lesson on out of all these things? Because in this project, I've got, just reading off a list I wrote right before the call, Stripe integration, MailerLite integration, the data using grids, URL routing, using route data so it comes from the back end, doing page headers so that you have the right metadata for, like Twitter tags and things, or Twitter cards and things like that. Just general project layout, complex filtering, and doing like multi-level filtering, things like that. And then creating a form and doing toggles and conditionals and all these different things. I've got just a ton in there. And the list kind of goes on and on. And so maybe as we go through it, if everyone could sort of think on, what is it that would be really useful for you in a lesson? And then maybe at the end of the call, what we could do is kind of get a tally of what are those lessons. And then next week, I'll focus on turning this thing into a pattern and creating all the lessons around it to match up to what everyone actually needs to see in a lesson around these topics. And I should be able to get all of that done next week sometime, because once it's in place, the lessons aren't hard when you have like a scenario already there. It's difficult whenever someone says like, how do you do X? But there's no, we need to go build that whole example. So that's why I was like, I'm just going to go build an example that has sort of like one of everything, and then we can go from there. So cool. So I'll dive in. Let me know. And feel free, by the way, like you don't need to wait till the end. If you have questions, just stop and ask. Just stop me, because I'm happy to dive in anywhere. Let's see, let me get my Zoom controls, if I can find them. There we go. Want to get the participants list up so that I can modify it there. Okay, so can everybody see the screen? Like, thumbs up, can y'all see it? Okay, cool. All right, so when I go to, I'll start in the studio and just kind of talk about laying out a project and sort of how I go about doing that. And, there's really no best way to do this, and it changes as you build. And I know this looks tiny because I've zoomed it all the way out so you can see the whole project on one view. But I tend to do things like this when I'm going to demo. So I've got these main areas, like where they're selecting which package they're getting, which job package they're getting, the home page, the general page of like the home page and its components like headers and footers and things, the new job listing form, how it's displayed when you're editing it. And then I made a small admin panel that I'll flesh out a little bit more next week for doing the admin side of, if you're running this job board and you need to like manually approve or extend a date or delete a post or modify a post for someone, that kind of thing. One thing I noticed in a bunch of the job boards I went and looked at was that because the job boards tend to be niched down into really small niches, so it's like a local job board, or one of my favorite ones I saw that I actually modeled a lot of this off of was ranchwork.com, which is ranchers finding help, and so it's a, you can imagine there's not like millions of users, right? There's thousands or maybe tens of thousands, right? I think the site says they get 50,000 unique visitors a month, which is pretty amazing, right? It's ranch work. and I think it's US and Canada only. But what I found was that because it's in these small communities, there's a lot of, like, they're not wanting to necessarily sign up for an account. They're not wanting all these extra bells and whistles because it's sort of like a once a year event, right? They go and post their thing, they pay you the money, they get the person they're looking for, or they get the job they were looking for, and then they don't think about this website again. They're not coming back here. It's not some SaaS model or anything like that. So that was why I decided, I'm not going to do the whole like user account, do all that side of it. I'm just going to make it really simple. So the general flow here, what I tend to do is I start with the homepage almost every time. So I'll build out a website view, an actual view of like the homepage itself. I almost always start, if I zoom in here, let's zoom into like 50% here. So I'll almost always do something along these lines where I have a home page, but I also have a header page. So this is a header page here, and this is a footer page here. And then I'll reuse that all over the place, right? So that's a really common thing. Now, there were some other design decisions I made in here. Like I have this left panel where you can sign up for a newsletter, and it has a partners section where you can easily like add partners and that sort of thing. So just common things that are on different websites and different web apps. But instead of just putting that into each page, I made another component page that I called left column, and then I just use it everywhere. So if I click on this, you can see that there's this component here. And if I go to the properties, it's got a component page called left column. So if I go to this other page called add job, it has the same left column component page. So every time I need to use that, I just reuse the same thing. I don't have to like create the actions again. I don't have to create the integrations again. And some of these pages can get complicated. So for instance, on the subscribe button, this runs out an action to MailerLite to do the subscription, right? So it actually just adds that user to my MailerLite account. And now I've got a new email address in MailerLite. You can obviously do a newsletter with any service you want to, but MailerLite, there is a MailerLite pattern that has a subscriber button. And Drew, this morning, I chatted into our group chat and said, hey, the one thing I don't think I'm going to get to is MailerLite. And he said, it'll take you like 2 seconds. Just go import the pattern. You'll have the action, and then just click the button and pull it in from an email address. And so I did that, and it was really like a couple of minutes and it was in there. But what's cool about it is if you put it into a component like this, I already had this component on all these different pages. And so when I went and updated this one subscribe button, it now automatically works on all the pages where I have that component showing. So that's really the reason for thinking in terms of components, is when it's not so beneficial right up front, right? When you're doing it, it's a little more work up front. But when you get going and you get through down into the project a little further, and you want to do something like add MailerLite or change it to a different service or something, you're only messing with that in one place now. So in general, that's sort of the component-based architecture that I like to go through. And there's one other way that I use pages. So this right here is a row. It's another page that I'll use inside of what we call a grid. So this is a job row that I created. And you can see it's this form is being used inside this grid on the left page, on the home page. So if I click on that, I can see that in the properties, the row page of that grid is called job row. So it's using that page inside of here. And then this gets its data from the list of jobs, which I actually did some complex filtering, which we can go over. So that sets the data into the grid. And then for each record, it's going to display one of these. And then inside of one of each of these little elements has the data binding set up to get its data from a certain field within the jobs collection. So that's kind of how the data structuring works, where I have this is sort of like a unique record, and then these things, this is to display a list of records, which will be represented by each of these rows. So in general, those are the two ways that I'm using pages as components. One is for something that I'm manually repeating across pages, where I'm saying, I want to use that header here. I want to use it on this other place. I want to use this left column on this other place. And then there's this other type where it's a repeating grid based on the data that's in the database, or data that you might be pulling from an API call, something like that. So that's the general structure. And you can see that I kind of reuse the same structure everywhere. So I have the same header across all the pages. I have the same, well, I guess hero panel across all the pages as well. There's two different types that I have. I have one that has some text, and I have one that's just sort of like a blank, just a bar. And so what this does, it makes it really easy for me to move things around and know what it's going to look like. And I actually noticed a little while ago that I had forgotten to put the footer on these pages. And so I actually added them, and then I was like, you know what, I'm actually just going to wait, and then I'll just show how I would go about fixing that. So because I forgot to do it, what I'm going to do is go to this home page where it already has it and just click on it and then copy on the left side and then go over to whatever page it's missing from. And I want it at the very bottom. So I'm just going to paste it to the page body, and it'll just add it to the bottom of that page. So I'll just do that to all these pages that I forgot it on. So we just go here, paste, and paste it to the page body. All right, so now I've got that, and you might have to move some things around because it made it a little bigger. Just keep the structure nice in here. So that's the huge benefit of those components, right? You can just easily move things around, copy and paste them. It makes it super simple. And to be clear, that I didn't actually copy and paste the elements. I actually just copy and pasted the component that points to that same footer page, right? So why don't I go through and look at the actual UI of it and the actual running application. And then we can step back in here and look at how I did some of the things that are inside of there. Let's see, I should have it open over here. Yeah. So actually, that is not the real one. VisualDev.Work.
Will the real job board please stand up?
There you go. So it's called VisualDev.Work. And I went and actually created bought a custom domain called VisualDev.Work. I also bought VisualDev.Work.com.
I don't know how you found that.
I don't know. People just aren't buying them fast enough, I guess. I have way too many domains. I know a lot of people who have a lot of domains. I'm one of them. So this is the home page. This is just the landing page. I intentionally left this pretty much unstyled. I was trying to keep it as unstyled as possible, because my goal here with this pattern is really not to teach styling and that side of Bildr. It's really more to teach functionality, data, and how to use the actions and things like that. So I intentionally left this thing, it's like almost visually appealing, but it's like has no flair to it intentionally. So you can also come in when you bring the pattern in, it makes it easy for you to just override anything. You can add whatever you want to it and change it. So there's really no reason once I make this a pattern that someone couldn't just start from this as a job board, turn it on, swap out all the pictures and swap out all the text and have something up and running pretty quickly. Like if I started from this within an hour or two, I could have my site live. It's basically just coming in and seeing, you know, if you're not for visual developers, if for something else, change it out. So the way this works is you have a list of all the job openings here. And then when if I want to go view one, I can just click on it and that will open up into another, or actually it takes over the tab, shows me that this company has this job position open with a job description. There's one thing I really wanted to add that I didn't have time, so I'll get it in there before the pattern goes. I want to make it so that when you're posting a job, you can upload a bunch of images and then show those images just show down. On that ranchwork.com site, it was really nice because like the ranch would, you know, show all the different, you know, beautiful pictures of their ranches. So it's really nice. I don't know exactly what visual developers would show pictures of, probably more links and things like that. But I did want to show how that works and how you go about uploading photos and then displaying those images in like a nice view. So we'll get to that as well. So the primary task in this project are these two buttons in the top right. There's post a job and post a job wanted. So if you're a company and you want a visual developer, you'll go post a job. If you are a person looking for a visual development job, you can click the button there. So I'll go post a job. And the first thing it does is presents me with 3 different options, silver, gold, and platinum. And we can go into any level of detail you all want to here. When we go back into the studio, we can go look at, you know, how I built these pieces and how that ties into Stripe, because these are actually tied in to particular Stripe products. So we can, I made that manual this time, but you can actually do this dynamic too. There's 2 different ways to do it. So I'll just select gold here, and that pulls up the job listing form. I can change out what I'm doing. So I can change the package here. I can change to job wanted versus job opening. And this is really all modeled on ranchwork.com. So look, I'll show you ranchwork.com. So if we go post a job, you can see they have the silver, gold, platinum. Click on it.
Perfect.
I just went and
Their little styles.
I like these things. This guy's on Twitter, the guy who runs this, and he talks about job boards quite a bit. I didn't know who he was until whenever I went looking for job board things. Oh, it looks like somebody was waiting in the wait list. Sorry, let him in. So this is one thing I'll do a good bit. Like if I was actually making a product out of this, I obviously wouldn't like go just take it one for one like this. But I'll do this a good bit where I'll go and just look at how do these other people do it? How do people who are already successful, how have they already made something like this? And then as I'm building it out, like if I was designing it, I would have made a whole set of changes to this. Like there would be lots and lots of changes. But I just wanted to show that because UX is probably the hardest part for me whenever I'm building something new. And so just going and looking at someone else's flow and like, what is the flow that they've found successful? So the user clicks here and it shows them this page. Like there's a reason that he allows you to switch from job opening to job wanted here. I wouldn't have done it that way in the beginning. I would have probably had 2 different forms, one for each button, but he had one form and he lets you switch between them. And I figure it's probably because somebody gets in there and they realize halfway through filling it out that they're filling out the wrong kind, and he wants an easy way for them to switch. That's an assumption I'm making, but you can kind of model UX after people who've already figured out how to be successful with it, right?
So Mark, we're getting a lot of questions on conditional. So I think it'd be great if you could show us when we get into the studio, when you change the option, how it switches out the options below.
I'm happy to dive in now too. I can just dive in now.
I mean, if you want to, it's up to you.
Yeah, let's dive in now because there's a couple of things that go on there. There's a lot inside of this that's kind of not obvious. So if you look up here, you can see it's got a URL route that says post a job or post a job ad, and then it has what are called query string parameters, $, package equals gold, and job type equals job opening. Okay, so when I was here and I clicked on gold and I'm in job opening, there's a action inside of this button, which I'll show you in just a moment. These 3 buttons have a different action on them. So if I click platinum, you'll see it says package platinum, job type, job opening. And I'm using that with a conditional logic to set which one is pre-selected. And then when they click on one, it doesn't mess with the URL anymore because it doesn't matter at that point, but I set some variables and then I use those variables later whenever they go to actually like pay for the package. I know which price they want and that kind of thing. So let's take a look at how I did that. So let's start with these pages here. So there's the job opening and the job wanted page. They're very, very similar. I actually made the job wanted page, got it all the way there. Then I just duplicated the page and then just swapped out the text and the buttons and those things. So made it much easier. But let's take a look. If I click on this button that we clicked on in the UI and we look at the events, you can see there's an action. And let me zoom in. Let's see. You can see there's an action here called action new job gold. So if I look at the flows, I have new job gold, new job platinum, new job silver. So these different buttons are running those different actions depending on which one they click. It's running the different flow, excuse me. So if I click on, say I want to see what happens when I click on the gold, what I'm doing is opening a URL. And the URL I'm opening, I did this a fancy way, and I did it this way because you might have like a test environment, you'll have a dev environment, and you'll have a production environment. So one thing that Bildr allows you to do when you're creating any input argument, you can use this type called concatenate. And when you use concatenate, you can string together any values And those values can come from anywhere in your project. So I manually type HTTPS, and then I get the subdomain from the system argument type. And the system argument type gives you access to a bunch of browser level things, right? So the stuff that JavaScript developers have access to. And then a dot, and then the domain. And then I manually type in what I want here. Now I could have done this dynamic too, like these could be, the packages could be records in the database, and we could pull it from that, and I'm displaying the dynamic. But I thought, you know, for a job board, that's really overkill. You know, there's the likelihood of having like going from 3 packages to 20 is pretty low. I think it's pretty much going to always be the 3 packages you start with. Maybe you add 1 more later. So doing things static is no problem for a project like this. But literally all I'm doing is concatenating together that URL. Now the URL has to match something, right? So this is going to go to my project / post a job add, right? So no matter what my custom domain is that I publish to later, or if I have a subdomain for my test environment, it's always going to get the right thing depending on what environment I'm running it in, because of this setup here, these 4. And then it's going to go to this static URL route called post a job add. So let's take a look at one other thing, which is over here on the left panel, our URL page routes. So this is what defines at the top level when a user of your project, or when anyone who's going to one of the public pages requests a specific page. This is going to determine what page of your project actually gets delivered to them in the browser. So let's take a quick look at that. So I've got a few here. There's not a ton in this project. Just home, I have an admin page. We have the posted job page, which is what we were looking at before. We have posted job wanted. So that's the 2 different pages that are for showing the different packages. And then the posted job add is the one that I'm opening there. And it's opening this page, no matter whether they're authenticated or not, it's opening the add job page that's in your project. So if I go look at the add job page, which is this one here, this is what gets opened. Now remember that it's opening with, so it's got the / route to get there, but then it's also opening with that question mark package and the job type, so that I have that data when this page loads. So when I'm looking at this page, if we go look at the page load actions, we can see what actually runs here. So one thing I tend to do, and it's just a habit that you don't actually have to do, but I tend to do it anyways, I take things out of the request and I set them into variables. I'll do this a lot, so that way I'm just always thinking in terms of variables, rather than like in this scenario, I'm going to get it out of the request, and in that scenario, I'm going to get it out of a variable. So the first thing I do in this page when it loads, so if we go back over here and we click on this, when this page loads, the very first thing it does is takes the values out of that request and sets them into 2 variables, one called package and one called job type. And I do that by getting the value from the request using a query string from the request. So if you don't know about requests, there are several ways you can do it. The 2 primary are query strings. So that's where you're going to see like question mark and then a value equals something. And if you have another query string parameter, that would be like ampersand or the and symbol, and then another name equals something. So you'll see this in like in all of your email sending programs and things like that. You'll see all these query string parameters, and they're doing the same thing. They're using all these values so they can do something specific on the page. The other way to do it, which I'll show you, I actually used segments in another part of this. Segments are where it's all the slashes. It's like maybe a blog post, right? So /post / the post name or whatever that is. So those are the 2 primary ones that I use a lot. And then anchors are where we have like a hashtag in there, and it's basically like pointing to something on the page. So maybe you want to scroll to that anchor or something like that. That's typically the use case there. So anyways, I'm setting the 2 variables, and then I run some conditions. So what I do on the first condition is I'm checking what job package it is, and then I check what job type it is. So is it gold, silver, or platinum? And is it a job opening, or is it a job wanted? That's what I called it. So let's take a look at just one. We'll just go to the job type. So there are several different types of conditions in Bildr. The two primary ones are the simple condition, which is if this value equals, doesn't equal, is greater than another value, whatever operator you use, then do this. Otherwise, do this other thing. Right? So it's like a condition, and then do this if it's true, do this if it's false. A switch does something different. What a switch does is it looks at a single value. So in this case, I'm looking at that variable called job type. If there's no match found for it, I run this one. And then I create a list of other values to check for. So if that variable, it says job opening, then run this one. If it says job wanted, then run this one. So you can use this to do all kinds of fun stuff, because the value doesn't have to be from a variable. It could come from a field on the page. It could come from a select menu. It could come from the URL you were in, or what time zone the user's in, or literally anything. So you can like check a certain value and see if it's a certain set of things. And if it's one of those things, then run a certain action. So this is where I have, if it's saying select job type, job opening, this flow is what does this thing. So when you switch back and forth between these, that's the flow. So one thing to note here, when I click on this, I'm running the same flow that happens whenever the page load runs. So this is something that you'll do a ton of in Bildr, where if you start thinking about your flows as reusable as well, it's something you kind of have to like get your head around, because it's not a normal process if you're not already a programmer. If you're a programmer, you're probably thinking in that way anyways. But if you're not, what you want to be thinking about is this something that I'm going to use again, where I could base it on some variable or something else, as opposed to making 2 static versions or 3 static versions of the same thing. And this does really go hand in hand with, I think, just no code in general. The concept of, if I do it more than once or twice, then probably automate that task, something along those lines. Similar thought process here. If it's something where you're going to create that same flow in like 2 or 3 different variants, there are ways to make it to where it's a single flow that uses a variable as the variance, rather than having 3 separate flows that you have to maintain long term. And it's one of those things, just like with the component-based pages, it's not something that does a ton for you up front. Like in the moment when you're building it, it doesn't give you a ton of benefit. But trust me, if you do it like this and you think about it in those terms, when you come back 3 months later to look at that project or deal with it, you're gonna have like paid dividends off of that. So this flow does a series of things. So remember, this is the flow where it's setting the type to be job opening. Now, there are 100 ways to do what I did here. You could use, actual radio buttons. I basically mimicked radio buttons here, right? And I mimicked them because I wanted to do lots and lots of other things, in addition to just a selection of that value and having an input. But the primary things I'm doing is I'm changing some classes. So I deselect and I reselect certain things. Now, the other thing I'm doing, you can't tell, but there's actually 2 sections called select your package. There's one for if it's a job opening, and there's another section for if it's job wanted. And I'm hiding and showing that section here. So when this says select your package, it looks like it's changing. It's actually hiding and showing 2 totally separate sections, right? And so that's a thing that you'll also do a good bit of, where you have these different states going on. When I'm clicking on this, I'm effectively changing the state, and that's adjusting what's here through these actions by hiding and showing things by adding and removing style classes. So like this one here, I add font weight to a particular text. That's what makes it bold. I add a selected style class to that circle, right? So that's what changes green to white. And then here, what I'm doing is I remove the display none class from the job opening section, and I add the display none class to the job wanted section. So there's two sections that it looks like there's one. I'm actually just like flipping it out, which one's displayed. And then I also set a value to say company name versus, if you look here, it says your full name, company name versus your full name, right? And then the last thing I do is I run this condition. Now this is a nested flow. So what it does is it checks to see which job opening or which package do I have selected. And then based on if the package is silver, gold, or platinum, I do a similar set of things to this. So that same action is what runs when you click on one of these. Like when I click on this guy or that one, that's running this same condition. So if we go look at that, like if I look at the event here, what it does is it sets the variable for the package. And then this is where I get into Stripe and I set the Stripe price that I'm going to use, the actual price mechanism. And then I run that same condition for the package to do which one is selected right now. So I know there's a lot inside of that, but those conditionals, and you'll have access to this project, you know, I'll get you the pattern and you can go dive in and actually step through each of these things. And this is what I wanted to know, right? So like now I know conditions, like I can do a lesson on this exact thing, walk through one of these in depth and show how every step is done and probably build one from scratch. I think maybe making one of these from scratch is probably the way to do the lesson. So any questions on, I know there's a lot inside of that, but any questions on how that works? Cora, anything that I should jump into before I move on?
If anyone has anything, feel free to chime in. We do have some questions in the community regarding conditionals. Do you want to go
Cool.
through them now?
Yeah, let's just stay on conditions for a minute. Let me go look at the chat.
Great.
Let's see.
Cool. So
let's see.
DJ is asking how to do conditionals in each row. For example, color it green if it's a full-time job. If not, it's white. Is that similar to what you just showed?
It is, but I do almost exactly that thing on the row here. But I do it for swapping out job opening versus job wanted. So it's the same thing. It just, instead of changing a color, I'm changing some text. So let's look at it there. So what I do on here, on page load, I run a condition on job type. So I have a flow here called condition job type that I nested inside of the page load. And in there, I'm doing a conditional statement. So this is the other kind. This is the simple kind, not the switch. And what I'm doing is I'm saying for the current records field value for the job type, the current records job type, if it equals job opening, then run this action, this flow. Otherwise, run this flow. And inside of those, all I'm doing in this case is literally just setting that text inside of there to say job wanted or job opening, and that's it. But you could use this same concept for anything you want. Swap out colors or hide and show things, do whatever you'd like to with it. And there will be some of that. I bet before I'm done with this next week, there will be some other things in here that I do that to, because there are some, like for instance, one of the things that's on here, there's another conditional on here where if you choose an office, I actually like show another field. And if you type something in there, well, I'll just pick something here. So we'll do like that, right? And then if I go remote, it kills it out. So what that means is on this row, I'm gonna want the same thing, right? So if it says remote, right now it just says remote or on site. But really what it should do is if it says on site, it should not say on site, it should show whatever the city is that they're in, you know? And so I'll want to do another set of conditionals on here. And what's great about the way that I structured this condition job type checks the job type, and then it runs through it. So if I wanted to do that same thing, I could just basically, this is how I do a lot of these things. I'll copy that text, I'll copy this action, I'll make a new flow, but instead of job type, I'll call it location. And then I'll paste that other one in there. Swap this from job type to location, And then if its value 1 is remote, I'll have to make a couple other things. So let's see, location equals remote, or location, and it might be something like, does not equal remote, or it might be something totally different. But then in the condition location, I'll swap these out for if it's true. So if that location equals remote, then run this flow. Otherwise, run it does not equal remote. And then I'll, inside of those actions, just go set up what I want. And then the very last step will be inside the page load, I need to nest my new condition. So now when this page loads, it's going to run all of that. It'll run this additional condition and set the values as it needs to, whatever it needs to be. Now, I didn't actually do anything in here, right? So it's just going to get to these points and run nothing, but you get the idea.
Okay. Can you add an action and show me what's in the base toolkit for conditions?
Yeah. And actually there's a new one in here that you don't have access to just yet. You will after you get this pattern, but let's take a look. So if I hit add action and I'll just type condition. So the compare values is the one we were just looking at. It's the one where you just say this value equals or doesn't equal this other value or greater than or whatever that is. Then run one of these two things. The switch is the one we looked at first, which is you set one value you're selecting and then where you're comparing, and then you have multiple values compared against it. And any of those that are true, it's going to execute the action. And then there's another set in there for if it's false, run this other action. And then the condition of whether the user is signed in. So you can just check to see if you have a signed in user right now on the page. And that'll get used for all kinds of things, for hiding and showing things, and showing whether or not, actually, if you go to Bildr.com and you're signed in, there's a button in the header that says go to studio. And if you're not signed in, it says sign in or sign up. So we use those exact same conditionals here. And then there's this one, which is a new one that I actually added because I had one of my developers actually this morning, we added this. I haven't even tested it yet, but I'm going to switch my validation method. So I'm validating all of these fields when you click the button at the end. It's like down here, if I, the Zoom call's in my way, I can't even see the button. There we go. So if I click this button, it's running a set of conditions and then flagging whatever is not matched and marking those things red. And then I also do the same thing in here, where if you type it in, I'm not validating on if that's actually a website. I am validating if it's actually an email address though. So if I type this in, like it's going to be invalid until you type something in that is valid. So once you get it to a valid state, it'll automatically do that. And I can show you how we do those as well. So there's types of validation that are like you're validating a series of things, right? Versus validating just a one thing or checking just a one thing. You want to validate a whole set of things. And there's a manual way to do that. And then this action makes that just much easier to do.
Cool.
So those are the four main ones.
Just to take it basic with the conditions, you'll set up a flow for the condition that checks whatever the thing is. And then you're going to go create flows for what happens in the various situations. And you go and select that flow to run on that thing, on that condition action. Okay, great.
Exactly. Yeah. So each of the output of these conditions is running more flows, basically.
I would like to put in a feature request to be able to create the flows from within.
Need it. Yes, great. This is something we definitely need. A little button right here at the top that says new flow. Yeah, totally. Okay. Write the task up, Cora. You have the power.
I know.
She prioritizes it for us.
I'm gonna put the note here. New flow link. Okay. Awesome. So I think we did have some. So VJ, I hope that answered the question on how you could use conditionals to show. I think Mark showed us with setting a value on the element, you would just use the set element style class to show or hide different classes for your case if you wanted to change the row color. Okay, and then Loriance's question was, could we go over filtering and conditionals? I would be interested to know if there were different tiers to a membership, how we could ensure limited access to certain areas or pages. So that one might be a little bit more complex of an answer.
Yeah, so if you're going to do a true membership setup, right, where you actually want to ensure that there's no way to hack it, I would not use JavaScript conditionals like this, right? Because I could step in there if I know what I'm doing and step in between them. So that gets into more of the data side conditional setup, where it's not really a conditional setup, it's data permission settings. And I don't have an example of it here to show, but I can definitely explain how it all works. So basically, when you set up a data collection, you can specify, and I don't really want to change, I'll just change it back, it's okay. So you can set up access types, and this user invitation only one is probably what you're going to want to do. So what that entails is you have sort of like a parent collection that's like the main thing, and the creator of that collection, or the creator of a record in that collection, always has access to that record. But depending on these settings, others may or may not have access to that specific record in the collection. So you can have all your users adding lots of records to the collections, but not everyone has access to everyone else's records. All right, so this is like, I use this I have a note-taking app that I'm building out for myself that I use. This is how Cycles works. Founder Update actually uses these exact same settings too. These are things where you really want to make sure that people can't just go get access to the project data of someone else's project in your thing, or whatever it is. So this user invitation only is what you want to do for that. And there's actually a default collection in Bildr that's by default. When you choose user invitation only, there are some other settings like what level of access do you want to give them? Do you want to allow these people to invite others or not? And you can actually specify this when that person invites another person to their record. So let's kind of break it out into a scenario. So I'll give you Cycles, which is our project management tool, as an example. So just think of a project management tool. So I'm an administrator of a project, and I create a new project, and then I need to invite my team members to it, right? So there's usually a process where they're being invited anyways. So when they get invited, there's another collection inside of Bildr that when you're creating records, let's see, I'll just add one here real quick, and then I'll delete it. Page load. Sorry, the Zoom calls in my way again. So let's do create record. There's one in here called record association. So this is where you're creating the association between a user and a specific record. So if you use this one, the fields that are in there are the things that you want them to have access to. So you need to tell it, which collection am I giving a user access to? Which record ID is it? So you probably just you're in the context of that project. So the record ID is that project's ID. So that's what you would put there. The login ID is the email address of the user that you're granting access to. And then whether they can edit it, whether they can invite, whether they can permanently delete, or whether they can just view, right? So you just set these values. And if you post into the community, I can make another one. It probably won't be this coming week, but maybe the following week, I can make a whole setup around this, because it does get kind of complicated. There's a lot of steps inside of there where you want to make sure that you're granting appropriate access. So for instance, you might allow invite, permanently delete, and editing only for admin level users of that, right? And then the last thing I would say there, let's make sure, there we go. The last thing I would say there is when you're in here, you can also, if you've enabled user restrictions, you can also add child collections. So you've got your project, and then inside that project, you have your tasks and you have your comments and you have all these things that have that same parent ID, right? So this is where you set that relationship up, and then those permissions come down automatically. So if the user has access to that project, they can access the task or whatever it is. Now you can also then go to the tasks list and add another access level if you want, the task collection, and add it in there as well, and make specific tasks only, work with user invitation. So it can go at any level you want. It cascades down automatically. So yeah, it's pretty deep in there. And you really, if you're wanting to be serious about the data security, do it like this, because this is on the back end, right? So even if they type in the request as if they're the other user, we don't care. We're checking to see if you have a valid authentication token, and it's running properly and not going to give you access to that data.
That was a wonderful walkthrough. Thank you for that explanation. That was very
No
helpful.
problem.
Thank you.
For sure. So one other thing, I'll wrap up the conditionals with one other piece on here, where I'll run the actions for those conditions in a bunch of different places. So one place I run it is on that button, whenever you click that button. Another place I run it is actually as the user types into the field. So when this page first loads, if I refresh this page, it doesn't run the conditions, because it would make everything show up red, right? If I ran all those conditions, it would like red. So I don't want it automatically, but if I type in test here and then I backspace it out, it's going to now make me aware that I can't have it like that. Or as I start typing the email, right, it tells me that that's not valid until I make it valid. And so depending on what you're doing there, you'll want to run these same conditionals in different places. So one place I run it here is on the checkout button. The other place is as the user types. And to do as the user types in Bildr, what that actually is an HTML event. It's a key event on whatever element they're typing into. So I'm inside the email field here. I'm on the events tab of that field. And there's some keys down here, or some events down here that say key down, key press, key up. And if you type new or click on new event and just type key, that's what those are here. So this is literally like when a user is pressing it, when the user presses the key, when the key comes up, when it's released. And so those are just standard web things. It's not really something from Bildr. We're just piggybacking on how the web works. But what's cool about it is if I'm using key up here and I'm saying validate the email address field as the user types. And this one's optional, so I don't do that one, but validate the website field as the user types is basically what that means. The other really cool thing you can do with these events that are based on the keystrokes is you can add key codes to them. So I could say on key up, do this, but also on enter, like if they hit enter in there, run a specific thing, right? Or if they hit enter and hold control, so you can make this really, really detailed in here and make really whatever types of events you want to occur. So like whenever you, say whenever you've got a sign up page or a sign in page, on the enter key, you might want to run that validation, because they might just type in the login, type in the password, hit enter, they're not going to click the button, right? So you're making the button and that enter key on that field do the same exact steps. And it's all, so it's all events. And then I use conditions a ton. I'm sure if you're building any type of project like this, you will too. So Cora, are there any other ones you think I should jump on before? I mean, there's a lot in here. Like we could go for hours and hours and hours. It's already 11:55.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I didn't even realize. I had to jump off because one of my keys started making this like sound, and so I lost the whole chat. And I know they're good questions, so I think I was just about to Slack Dorian to be like, hey, can you chat me all the questions in there?
Yeah, here, let me just go through them. Hang on, I've got them up here. Let's see.
But it sounds like we still have a ton to cover, so I'll think about maybe doing like another session or something.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do another one anytime. Like we could set some up interim.
Yeah, cool.
So let me go through these real quick. Yeah, so nice. So Kevin asked about organizing different actions and going over filtering. Why don't I do that real quick? So when I'm thinking about my actions, I mean, it always gets built out as you build, right? So the flows, I don't like think through what this whole page is going to have in it. You can see this thing got big quick. I don't think about it beforehand, but I do try to use certain naming conventions to help. Dorian actually gave me the action one. The action one is I do that on anything where a user actually performs a click or something like that. I just like put the word action in there because if I can go through the elements and I can see which ones they, what they're doing. Like I can see that the silver has this thing. So that's one way you can do it for that, but it makes it much easier for me to just find based on what type of thing they are. And we're thinking about, like, I want to redo this UI anyways, but one thing we've always wanted is folder structures for this. So we're thinking about how to best do that in the UX, because when pages get really big, it does get cumbersome. And then in terms of the naming convention for conditions, no matter what type of condition it is, I almost always put condition first. And I very rarely will actually just put a condition action directly inside of another flow. I almost always make a flow specific to that condition action. And I do that because I think it's probably just like intuition at this point from just building so many projects. I reuse conditions so often that I want to do that. And then, yeah, so the rest of this is sort of naming convention. You can just see I use like set, and then I have all these validate ones, which validates are actually conditions, but because they're different, I'm using them differently here. So naming convention is a big part of it. When I'm starting a brand new page, I typically will build the elements first until I get to a point where the user needs to click on something or view some data in a list or something like that. When I get to that point, then I'll switch over to actions and then switch back to styling. That's whenever I start going back and forth, but I almost always start in the elements. And then on the data, I'll just really quickly show you. I intentionally did this one in a way that I probably didn't need to, but I did it this way because I wanted to show a different type of data. So rather than like setting up a data binding on this grid, there's no data binding at all to it. Instead, what I did is on page load, in the page binding, I actually checked to see, are there any job openings? Are there any jobs wanted? And then based on that, I go through a series of things. So I checked, I'm checking to see if, not checking to see if there are any, I'm checking to see if those are checked or not. Oh, she had to go. I thought she was waving at me like she couldn't hear me, and I was like, uh-oh, wait, how long have I been talking and nobody can hear me? So I check to see if it's checked or not, and then if it is, I set a variable, and I'm actually using a transform data action here. So this is in the pattern that's called data manipulation. If you import that, there's a set of actions in there that let you do some really cool stuff. This is probably the simplest one, where I'm just filtering by a specific value. But there's other ones where like you can filter by another array of records. So like you can do filter, filter one collection by another collection, that kind of thing. And so in this case, I'm just saying, give me all the jobs, but only the ones that are job opening and have a status of paid. So I'm only showing the ones that are paid. And in another part of the project, I actually go and set that value of paid after Stripe has refreshed back and confirmed that it's paid. Then I set the value of paid. And then I filter that by the end date being greater than or equal to the current full date time. So the current time right now. And there's another part of this where on the end date, I actually calculate the end date when the user pays for it. I calculate the end date based on the number of days that they had selected in their package. So it's like 30, 60, 90 days or 60, 90, 180 or something like that. And I'm just doing a math on it. And I'm actually using, in this case, I'm using Unix timestamps to do it. And I'm like literally just adding like the seconds count or whatever it is to it. So this is a way to do it. I wanted to build it like this just so that way I could show a different way of doing data. So what I do is I set these variable values based on whether or not these boxes are checked. And then it runs this refresh jobs action, or this flow, which sets the grid, but it sets the grid by merging the arrays that are inside of those variables that I set. So this is like a totally different way to do data. And this was one of the things I wanted to try to showcase in this project, is that you can use our standard data mechanisms, but you can also just like go completely off and do it however you want to do it. Because there are some times where like you might want to say you want to merge like some API data with some internal data collection data. This is how you would do that. You go get an API call, set it into a variable, and then use a merge to set your collection data plus that data all into the same thing. And you can use those data transform actions to modify and manipulate the data to like, make it all, to sanitize it, make it all the same. So that's how I ended up doing it in here, but there's 100 ways to do this stuff. There's one other thing I'll show you on the data too. When you have it into a grid, let me get over to the admin. So I have an action on this search input. It's on the key up, just action search jobs. There's a search grid action. All you do is select the grid and select the element that has the search value, or get the search value from wherever you want. And that makes it do like this. So I can just type, whatever I want in here. So I could type, say I want to type remote, it'll find all the remote ones, because I didn't tell it what not to search by. So it's literally like searching everything. And so I can do like, remote, and then I guess it isn't searching everything. It's missing something. Maybe I'd limited it to something else, because should be, yeah, but you get the idea there. So that makes, and just so the more technical side of how this is done, when you get the data into the grid, and Dorian's actually working on making a nice UI around this, the grid actually contains, and all of our elements contain a lot of different data inside them, but the grid is special in a couple of ways. It actually has, if you go look at the JavaScript, you can see it in your project. If you go to the element type, into the function, and just look at the grid. Like if you ever want to know how to, like what we consider our best practices around like how to create new element types in Bildr, go take a look at the grid. This is a really complex element type. It uses all of our Boppy helper functions that we have, the Bildr API functions in there. And you can see it has all these different options, all these different methods inside of it that are built in. And some of those that you'll see in there are get value, get data, get search, I think it's get search data, something along those lines. So basically we're always storing these 3 different sets of data in here. One is all the data that could be displayed. The value is all of the displayed data right now, whatever's actually in the display. And then there's the search results data, which is all of the data, but limited by the search, but it may not all be getting displayed because maybe on the grid you've set it to only, it's got pagination, it's only showing 20 or something like that. So, we've thought through all these really complex scenarios where you, and it's because we have to use it for stuff like Bildr, right? We use it for those things where you have 2,000 or 100,000 records. You might bring all 100,000 to the page, and that's going to give them instant search because of that, right? Or you might bring the first 20,000 and then like lazy load the rest or something like that. And I have been testing that, by the way, with like how many records can I bring at one time. I think about 200,000 is probably the max I would try to load at any one request to our server right now. Anything more than that, and it's going to probably time out because we have limits on, like, we're rate limiting stuff. But in the UI, I think it'll handle quite a bit more than that inside that grid. All right, so let's go through a few more. Global find and replace. Yes, there is a global find and replace, and I'm gonna have to trash it out of here. There's a couple of ways to do this. I can't remember if the mash change will do that. So there's one way to do it would be an action. where you're basically saying, go through whatever this is. So go get a data collection of data, or go get an API request, or whatever it is. Just give me an array of data, a JSON array. And then inside of there, modify a specific property. So if I'm getting a collection, it's going to say, give me, a specific field that I want to modify, and modify it with this value. So that's going to mass change whatever's in there. And this can come from wherever. There's more complex ways to do this too, where you can actually do a mass change from another, based on like what it is, mass change it to this versus that. You can also do it that way. And then the other way to do this is with what we call a path function. So I'm just going to do a set variable action, and just so we can have something to show here. And let's do, I'll just do it like that. Ignore what I'm actually putting in here. It's this path function that I wanted to show here. So we're actually building a UI around this as well, because we're finding that this is super powerful for people, and I use it all over the place. You may have seen it in some of my actions that I was going through before. But the add path, this actually gives you access to a ton of built-in JavaScript methods that you can just use. And if you're in a Builder project and you open up debug on Chrome, if you go to sources, scripts, and Boppy model, if you go in here, you can actually see all the path functions. So this is like toString, is true, is Boolean, is object, get value from path. There's all these different things that are in here. And one of those is, if I remember right, there's a find and replace in here. I can't see what I'm typing because of the, there we go. Find. Is there not a find in here, Dorian? I thought there was. Or is it replace?
There is, but just search for replace or replace all.
Yeah, that's right. It's replace and replace all. So we don't have a UI around this yet for knowing what the syntax is, but if you know JavaScript, you can actually just come in here and look and see how we do it. But basically what you do is you would have like replace, and it's pretty simple in this one. It's like replace A, comma B is going to replace A with B. It's pretty straightforward on that. There's also replace all, which will replace all instances of A with B. But this needs a UI around it for a bunch of reasons. One is because, how are you going to know? You have to go like, look, there's no documentation on this. But the other reason is that we can actually build these values if we do it as a UI. So what I mean by that is, right now, if you type in here, you can't like pull the value for B from a variable on the page, for instance, right? There's no way to do that with this. So you'd have to go like make a whole JavaScript function and an action and all this stuff to get that. So when we put the UI around the paths, it's going to open up a whole other world of stuff that like I personally want, but I don't remember how to use replace half the time. I have to message Dorian and say like, what was the one that does this, and what's the, and he has a nice little documentation thing on it that we need to publish. But so we'll get a path UI around that, and I think it'll help a ton. Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to look through them. Let's see, does the user restrictions on the data happen before the data is pulled so the data is restricted and not downloaded? Yes, it's server side. So that's all on the server side. Yeah, so there's no way to hack it. I mean, you'd have to have our like root level access inside of our servers to get beyond it. And we will be rolling out a whole other set of filtering where right now all the filtering that you do, so there's data restrictions, right? There's that whole thing that's server side, but then there's also, let me delete this. There's also the filters that you can apply when you're either setting a value from a collection or when you're using it on a collection list on an element like this, where you can add these filters. These filters all happen in JavaScript, right? So it's going to go and these filters exist in JavaScript. It's going to go do the request from the server with those filters. But we actually have in the back, and we just don't have a UI around it, a way for you to create server-side filters. So that way this set is limited. It's only going to retrieve what the server-side limitation is already providing, right? So what that means is you can do things like, give this filtered set of data here, but if it's that user, pre-apply a server-side filter first, right? If it's this other user, don't, or apply a different filter for that other user. Or for instance, when we roll out the backend API, that server-side filtering is what will be used for whenever the API gets called, you can filter out data for that API. So that'll be coming as well, but we're not there yet. The tech is already there, the core is already there, and our previous versions of Bildr actually already had it in there. We just don't have a UI around it in here. So there's no way for you to set it up, but it'll come. Let's see, I saw there was one question in here, I can't find it, but there was one about flows being scoped to the page. And yes, they are scoped to the page. So any set of flows are going to be scoped to that page, but you can run things on the other page, right? So, and I do that quite a bit. So for instance, here, let's see, I think it's on here. So this close button here, this is if someone subscribes. So let's go actually subscribe in here and we can just look and see what it looks like. So if I come up here and I'll just type a fake email in, 4@Yahoo or whatever, and subscribe. Okay, so that popped up a like success, you're subscribed, and then you click on this button and it closes that. So what actually happened there on this little left column page, I have a lightbox element on here. And when that subscription occurs, let's go through the action. On success, it runs this other flow, which opens this success subscribed page into the lightbox that's on here. So it opens it into this lightbox. And then I run a flow called show lightbox. So that's what pops it up. Now on this page, when they click close, I'm actually running an action back on that left column page to hide the lightbox. Right, so I'm like running it over there. This action is really, really powerful, this run action on page. There's a lot you can do with this. So one, the most simple, the simplest way to use it is what I just did there. I know there's only one instance of that page. I'm just running it, just run it on whatever page instances you find. But you can also do it on specific pages using those. Sorry, I'm trying to get these things out of my way so I can see. You can also do it on specific pages. So you can see here, there's these options for variable name and variable value. What this does is says, only run it on the instance of the left column page where the variable called A equals a value of B. Okay, so that limits which one it's going to run. That's important if it's like, say you're running to run an action on a grid row page, but only on a specific row or on a specific set of rows based on the data that's inside of those rows. That's what that's for. So you can see that I actually do that over here. So like if I go to page load and I click page binding, you can see it actually like, you see it switched it. And when I click the X, it makes the other one show selected. I'm literally doing that exact thing. When you click on this, I run one action that's that does on the selected, I go to this one, the one I clicked on here, I find it using that variable, using the ID, and I run an action that sets this one as the selected one, but then I run another action that runs on other pages, and I choose that other option called, what was it? Let's see. Where did it go? Oh, here. So I run, the second thing I do is I run all except current page. So what happens is like when you click on this, when I click on that one, it runs this to select this one, and then it deselects the one that was already selected before it. I actually do it a little different. I actually find the one that was selected first, and I just run the action to deselect on that one. You got to be careful with some of these things. Like if you do what I said here, and there's like 1,000 rows, it's going to go run that action, that JavaScript's going to execute on 1,000 rows, which you don't want, right? So these things are like really powerful, but you can also like, you know, make a nice little memory leak and maybe nest an action inside of there that does it on all the other ones or something. So you can have some fun with that. If you're ever experiencing like sluggishness in the UI when the user is like moving around in the UI that you built, it's probably something like that. Like when I find something, it's either like I'm asking for like all the data instead of just what I want. I forgot a filter or something, or I'm running some action on 1,300 instances of some page I have open somewhere, or it's some loop in there. So let's see. There was another one about viewing flows as a DAG at some point.
Yeah, Shannon asked that. He's got a couple questions at the bottom.
Yeah, so, and I'm assuming that's like I don't actually know what a DAG stands for, but I'm assuming it's like a diagram of some sort, like a flow type diagram, right? Yes, I'm actually working on that right now. We're building a new element type that everyone will have access to once we have it ready. And it's basically a data visualization way to visualize data in nodes on a page with relationships. And I need it because I want to build a nice, Integromat Zapier style view of our flows and the actions and how it all relates. Because I'd say when a page gets really complicated, especially if you haven't touched that project in a month, right? And you come back to it and you go into something that looks like, go into a set of flows that looks like this. It's like, what is happening on this page again? If I know what it is right now, because I built it all like last night and this morning, but in a month from now, I'll come back and I'll go, oh man, now I got to step through every piece, which isn't like super hard to do. I'm like, okay, I'll go through here. I see it's running that, and then it runs this, and then it goes there. But man, a nice visualization would be great. So yes, that is coming. Let's see, where was that one at?
And then he's asking, he said, I think I heard him mention it, but all actions right now are on the front end, but are we going to get the ability to create back-end specific actions?
Yeah, so you can already run serverless functions. The thing that's missing from those is that they don't have access to the database. And so you're limited in what you can actually do with those right now, right? So you can do a lot with them. And when you go, if we go look at action types on the left, and I go to functions, if you add a new function, I'll just type something in here. I'll toggle that to server-side function and create it. When I go to the JavaScript tab in here, you're going to set your methods, set the dependencies. You can add whatever secrets you need in there, and then you can actually go pull in NPM packages from here too. So like if you wanted to use the backend Stripe packages instead of just using the front end stuff, you could do that here. Just pull in, and it's literally all of NPM. You can access it here and pull it into your project. But like I said, that's not it, because it doesn't have access to your data. You're limited in what you can really do with that right now. Once we open that up to have access to your data, then you can do all kinds of other fun things.
Great. I think that's it. Were there any other questions that we didn't get to?
Tim asked about the data transformation on that data. Those actions are JavaScript actions. So that's all happening in JavaScript there. Yeah, so we need to open up the data API for you to be able to do what you're looking for there. And we'll basically end up with all those same actions toggle to run them server side or run them in the JavaScript. You just switch between them. And we actually already have all these in our previous versions of Bildr. We just haven't exposed that API yet. Some of these projects we've built over the years are massive ERP systems, and you can't run that stuff in the JavaScript. It's just, you need data from all over the place. And, some of it's siloed data, some of it's like external stuff that you don't want to be pulling in. So we definitely get the need, and it's coming.
Awesome. I think everyone can kind of tell like the power and the functionality is there, but now we're kind of like bringing it back in and making UIs around stuff. So it's just easier for everyone to use. But generally there's always a way to do something. And if not, let us know and we'll add it into our feature request list. But I think we're at a good wrapping point. Snoopy wanted to say hi to Tim. So this is the culprit for all the snores. It's my little foster dog. But great. This was a really awesome session. I will post it in the community here when I upload it in an hour or two. And then that way anyone can reference it if you know, there was something cool you wanted to see. And then the plan will continue debugging the job board app. And then what I'll do is I will chat everyone a link so that you can go look at it, either read only in the pattern view or bring it into your project and use it. So that will be very exciting. Okay,
Thanks,
everyone. We'll have a wonderful weekend. Thank y'all for joining.
Talk soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mark.